Between 1945 and 1954, France waged a remote war more than 9,000 kilometers from Paris. It was an horrific war, marked by bargaining and betrayal, idealism and disillusionment. It was a war of liberation and servitude, of hope and hell. This war devastated a country, caused hundreds of thousands of deaths, and initiated the collapse of the French colonial empire. It was a war with many facets: a colonial war, a war of independence, a Cold War, and a long-forgotten war. The French were living happily in their colony of Indochina, which included Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. After the Second World War, a communist leader, Ho Chi Minh, declared Vietnam's independence. A war ensued. Although the French army initially scored a series of victories, it gradually became overwhelmed by the guerrilla warfare waged by Ho Chi Minh's Viet Minh troops. In 1949, the Communists seized power in China. It was a turning point. Mao Zedong offered Ho Chi Minh logistical and military support. The colonial war turned into a Cold War conflict. Although public opinion was critical of this distant war, French leaders wanted to continue the fight. To keep fighting, Paris needed to find fresh inspiration. In 1951, Paris sent its most prestigious general to Indochina, Jean de Latte de Tassigny, hero of the Second World War. As soon as he arrived, de Latte summoned his officers.
I've come to save you because you're the ones getting killed. No more surrendering. From now on, you will be under my command.
De Latte traveled through Indochina, dismissing people, making rules and adjustments in his wake. The army wanted a leader. They had found one. The man lacked neither talent nor panache. De Latte was harsh, but respected, especially as his son Bernard fought in Indochina too. King Jean, as he was nicknamed, had everything at his disposal. He summoned up tremendous enthusiasm. Too bad for anyone tired and weary. Journalist Lucien Baudard concluded,
I've never seen anyone make an entrance like de Latte did in Indochina.
De Latte's arrival left the Viet Minh unimpressed. On December 25, 1950, General Giap launched a general offensive into the north of the country with the aim of taking Hanoi. Five divisions, armed and equipped by China, attacked the French defenses, which were ill-prepared and weakened. The situation was critical. As soon as he arrived, de Latte personally assumed control of operations. He hurled all his forces into the battle. He requisitioned civilian aircraft to reinforce the garrisons under attack. For the first time in their lives, soldiers and riflemen were offered business-class travel by the army. The general purchased a new weapon, special shells supplied by the Americans. napalm. This jellied gasoline spread death and panic among the enemy. Go Van Shu, a Viet Minh fighter, remembered.
The planes dive, and all hell breaks loose before my eyes. An immense flame spreading for hundreds of meters, sowing terror in the ranks of the combatants. Napalm, fire falling from the sky. The men are fleeing, and I can't hold them back any longer.
Napalm would ravage Vietnam for 3 decades. Lucien Baudard testified.
The flames ran faster than the Viets, overtaking and engulfing hundreds, perhaps thousands of them.
Delattre never shied away from employing this terrifying weapon in the name of advancing peace. He was not afraid of international criticism, and for good reason. The use of napalm by the Americans in Korea had provoked no reaction whatsoever. There is no such thing as a just war. Delattre dealt a crushing defeat to the Viet Minh, who lost more than 8,000 men in the battle. He also handed France its first major victory since the start of the war. The French soldiers were revitalized. From that point on, the troops, led by a prestigious leader, no longer fought for the small world of the colonists. They were fighting under the banner of the free world. 1951 had been shaping up to be a great year for the Viet Minh, but it turned out to be a difficult one. But one of their attacks shook Delattre to the core. On May 30th, 1951, a Viet Minh column struck the Hoi Hak Peak, commanded by Bernard, his only son. The young officer was mortally wounded. Delattre joined his wife in France to bury their son's body. The whole nation mourned their terrible loss. The general explained.
Bernard didn't die for France. Bernard died for Vietnam.
Delattre did not give up. As soon as his son was buried, he returned to the field. His mission was not over. King Jean met with the leaders of the French Indochina states, King Norodom Sihanouk of Cambodia and Sisavang Vatthana, Prime Minister of Laos, to assure them of France's support and to keep them out of the conflict. In a show of support for the emperor, Bao Dai, he made a public appearance with him. Delattre wanted to include the Vietnamese in the fight against communism. He set about building a Vietnamese national army. Tens of thousands signed up to fight alongside France against the Viet Minh. In 1949, Vietnamese nationalist troops numbered 25,000 men. They soon exceeded 130,000, trained and instructed by French officers. Young recruits received 4-star training.
L'apprentissage est rude. Il faut des muscles d'acier pour courir la montagne ennemie et surprendre l'adversaire. Il faut des nerfs domptés pour le guetter jour et nuit et l'abattre sans bruit au bon moment. Il faut du souffle pour tenir des jours et des nuits de durs efforts. En Indochine, l'élément liquide est souverain. Il faut y disparaître pour pouvoir, le couteau aux dents, venir surprendre le guetteur ennemi qui surveille la digue et le noyer sans un souffle.
In September 1951, a tireless de Latte flew to the United States because the war was costing France 1 billion francs a day. His aim was to persuade the powerful United States to contribute funds.
Thank you very much, General de Latte. Dave. I want to thank you also for this nice weather that you brought with you.
Yes. Je viens ici en soldat pour expliquer à mes camarades soldats d'Amérique ce que c'est que le problème de l'Indochine, quelles sont nos difficultés, et plein de confiance dans la manière dont ils comprendront ce que je viens leur expliquer et dans les conséquences logiques qu'ils sauront en tirer avec leur esprit d'aide si amical pour la France dont ils ont donné toujours les preuves les plus indiscutables et les plus généreuses. Et je suis content que le soleil vienne ce matin donner un bon départ à cette visite. Je dis tout de suite, merci à l'Amérique, merci à mes camarades, les armées américaines.
General de Latte gave countless interviews. He had to be persuasive, but English was not his strong point.
I am very pleased to be here. Non, c'est idiot. In Korea, there is a war against communism. In Indochina, there is a war against communism. In Korea and in Indochina, there is the same war. There is one war in Asia.
Despite his disastrous accent, the general had good press. President Truman was won over and welcomed him to the White House. His mission was accomplished. The United States increased its support considerably. From then on, it would finance 40% of the war, a share that would grow throughout the conflict.
A jeep carrier from the U.S. brings a flight deck load of cheer for French and Vietnam forces in Indochina. Grumman Bearcats that once flew for Uncle Sam's Navy now fight freedom's battle in another theater of war. The reinforcements from across the sea have helped General de Tassigny throw back the communist Ho Chi Minh until Ho abandoned his frontal warfare and ordered his Reds to return to guerrilla tactics. It's a victory of sorts, a psychological lift for the free world, just as the sight of these fighter planes is a psychological lift for the citizens of Saigon. These Bearcats are not too little or too late.
De Latte's gamble paid off. He managed to contain the Viet Minh and curb the prevailing defeatism in the army. Uncle Sam showered him with dollars, and a French-supported Vietnamese National Army finally entered the fray. Brilliant results. But de Latte kept a cool head. Jap still had the Chinese outpost at his disposal. The general warned,
there may be disasters in Indochina, but there are no miracles.
De Latte would not be there to see either of them. After months of suffering from hip cancer, he returned to France in November 1951. King Jean died 2 months later following an operation. The general joined his son. All of France was in mourning. They mourned a leader whose reputation had fueled their hopes. His death stripped away the veil of illusions. Ever since the guns began firing, the nature of the war was in a constant flux of change. Bao Dai's French-trained Vietnamese National Army now confronted Ho Chi Minh's People's Army of Vietnam. The Cold War had degenerated into civil war. Hundreds of thousands of people were torn apart on both sides. Never had the country been so divided. In the communist camp, radicalization was underway. With China as a guiding example, the movement was strengthening its grip on the populations under its control, whether willingly or by force. Its Department of Public Security encouraged denunciation and arrested, tortured, and murdered anyone who stuck out their head. To win the support of the peasant masses, an agrarian reform was adopted. Behind the propaganda images promoting the fair redistribution of land, an immense purge was taking place. Any citizen whose loyalty was under suspicion was eliminated. Nguyen Con Loan, a Vietnamese man, explained.
Poor peasants were brought in and forced to denounce the crimes of landlords before the People's Court. The court had the power to pronounce death sentences, and a platoon carried out the executions on the spot. In some places, the condemned was stoned, hanged, left to die of thirst and hunger, or even buried alive.
Thousands died in the purge. Nearly 100,000 Vietnamese were sent to camps, many never to return. A fratricidal confrontation that the colonists ignored. They generally resided in the cities. In Hanoi and Saigon, they were still able to enjoy the sunny days in the midst of the chaos. The savviest, the most affluent, quietly began to pack up. Major companies were leading the way. An illusion of tranquility. Soldier Albert Merglin wrote in his diary,
At 20 or 30 kilometers from Hanoi, we only leave the road with our companies, weapons in hand. It's clear proof that behind the front there's nothing but emptiness, bluffs, and incompetence. Even if we win this war, we will have to leave Indochina.
A kind of lucidity that political leaders were woefully lacking. By 1953, France was in the throes of crisis. On the military front, the war proved unwinnable, even with American aid. On the political front, Bao Dai had failed to win over his people. Intelligent but tactless, it seemed obvious that Bao Dai was an idle leader in the service of the French. He may have the suit, but he lacked the substance. The political deadlock was obvious. Back home, the French were impatient. Between the chronic instability of governments and the cost of the war, the public were weary. All the more so when a new scandal broke out. An official exposed the extent of the trafficking of piastres. Settlers and soldiers were pocketing the difference between the official and actual exchange rates. But they weren't the only ones. Ministers, members of parliament, civil servants, and bankers all helped themselves. Worse still, the investigation revealed that the Viet Minh took advantage of the system to buy weapons on the international market. It was the last straw. The political and military crisis was turning into a crisis of confidence. The French didn't want to hear another word about this bloody war, which was ruining the country and only benefiting the profiteers. As for the soldiers, after Dalat's successes, they were thoroughly disgusted. Yves Arbelot wrote,
We are suffering morally from this abandonment by the French people. We do not accept that our sacrifices are in vain. I have lost some very dear friends. Sometimes, when I think of them, Tears come to my eyes.
After 7 years of blindness and indecision, France's leaders finally understood that they had to negotiate, but they wanted to do so from a position of strength. The government was placing its hopes on Henri Navarre. The brilliant but arrogant general knew nothing about Indochina, and he was chosen for that very reason. He would bring a new perspective to the situation. His mission was to inflict such heavy losses on the enemy that France would be able to dictate the conditions during negotiations. René Mayer, the 17th Prime Minister since the start of the conflict, gave him only one instruction: find an honorable way out. Navarre chose a modest airbase used during the Second World War, located right in the middle of Viet Minh territory, a plain of 65 square kilometers surrounded by mountains, Dien Bien Phu. Navarre planned to build an HQ in the center. Fortified outposts, christened with feminine names, would guarantee its protection. General Navarre was assisted by General Conny. The Dien Bien Phu base would be commanded by Colonel de Castries. In November 1953, thousands of paratroopers were dropped to take over the basin. Despite a few casualties, the operation went off without a hitch. Shortly afterwards, a runway was built. A steady stream of planes dropped off soldiers, cannons, and engineers. The modest base became a huge camp, complete with trenches, bunkers, and a hospital. Nothing was lacking, not even a military field brothel. Navarre wanted to construct a formidable base in the hope that General Giap, captivated by the tempting challenge, would simply engage in combat. But some soldiers were not at ease with this idea. Lucien de Boudec wrote,
At Dien Bien Phu, we tethered ourselves like a goat to its post. We're the prey attracting the Viet Minh tiger. I don't really like this situation.
But Navarre had no doubts about his plan. For 7 years, the French had sought out the enemy. This time, it was the enemy who would come to them for a true, fair fight. As Dien Bien Phu was being built, General Giap decided to take up the challenge. Years of struggle had transformed the history teacher into a seasoned strategist. He marshaled his army in the jungle. The Viet Minh fighters were eager to fight. They probably had no choice in the matter. A huge network of 260,000 men transported supplies and equipment over a distance of almost 700 kilometers. But it was mainly Chinese and Soviet trucks that brought weapons and food supplies close to the hills. Roads were dug through the jungle to ensure that what was needed arrived on time. In January 1954, the French waited confidently for the assault. The base was ready. Victory was beyond doubt. The camp leader, Colonel de Castries, even dropped leaflets to provoke General Giap.
General, why are you waiting to start this battle? Do you doubt your success? Have you lost faith in the value of your generals and the enthusiasm of your troops? Come on, I'm waiting for you.
But General Giap kept a cool head. He preferred to meticulously prepare for the battle, knowing that a defeat would be devastating. And Ho Chi Minh had given him orders.
Don't fight unless you're sure you're going to win. Otherwise, refrain.
Time was on the Viet Minh side. 27,000 tons of material were transported around the base. While Soviet trucks were mobilized, men and bicycles joined in the effort. Giap claimed ironically that, thanks to these bicycles exported en masse since the 1930s, Peugeot had been the most decisive soldier in the battle. The French people were neither deaf nor blind. They knew what was coming, thanks to their intelligence services. Faced with the influx of Viet Minh reinforcements, General Navarre began to have doubts. He wrote to Paris. No one replied. Yet, the French general did not back down. Soon, 50,000 Vietnamese fighters were encircling the 12,000 soldiers of the French army. While the knives were being sharpened, the diplomats were keeping busy. In Geneva, the superpowers prepared a high-level conference at the Palais des Nations to discuss Korea and Vietnam. The Battle of Dien Bien Phu came at just the right time. Both the Viet Minh and France wanted to win so they could sit at the negotiating table as victors. At Dien Bien Phu, on March 13, 1954, Giap's army was ready. At 5:15 p.m., all hell broke loose. The Beatrice strongpoint, 2.5 kilometers away from headquarters, exploded. The post commander was killed and the radio links destroyed. The defenses collapsed during the night. The Viet Minh artillery was more powerful than expected. Concealed on hillsides and in caves, it was undetectable. On March 15th, it was Point Gabriel's turn to fall. General Piroth, head of the French artillery, didn't believe that the Viet Minh would be able to position their guns on the slopes. He committed suicide after realizing his mistake. By the fifth day, 4 French battalions were out of action. The valley was pounded with shells. Firepower was supposed to be the French's trump card, but it was the Vietnamese who had it. No more planes could land. The entrenched camp was virtually unsupplied, except by parachute drops. Even so, Viet Minh anti-aircraft defenses prevented any accurate airdrops. The Viet Minh launched wave after wave of assaults, even if it meant dying by the hundreds. The ultimate sacrifice for their country was simply to save themselves. One of them said,
"The deluge of fire from the enemy continues to fall. The only way out is to charge forward. We'll die if we stay down anyway. We must leap from our shelters, running at full speed towards the barbed wire. In front of the breach, the dead and wounded are piling up. Half our battalion is dead or wounded.
In this epic battle, who were the fanatics? Who were the patriots? The French forces also died en masse for the cause. More than 4,000 men parachuted down from the sky. These volunteers knew the battle was lost. Some had never jumped before. They sacrificed themselves in solidarity with their buddies. The initially silent descent ended in the deafening roar of flak and machine gun fire. Private Pierre Latin recounted,
When I landed, I saw shell impacts raising earthen sprays and men flailing about. Everything exploded around me. I felt as if I had fallen into another world.
Another soldier said,
The further down I went, the more the smell of corpses caught in my throat.
Faced with fierce resistance from the French, the Viet Minh resorted to slowly strangling the camp. Every night, their fighters dug trenches and nibbled away. The base was shrinking. A Vietnamese soldier explained,
We were encircling the enemy on all sides. The galleries dug by our infantrymen were so close to the barbed wire of the French posts that they joined their own trenches.
The French forces were overwhelmed by the attackers. In what remained of the bunkers, resistance continued. There was a rumor that the Americans would support the war effort. The free world would hold out. After all, it was during this time that Paris dispatched its chief of staff to Washington.
France's Chief of Staff with President Eisenhower and Admiral Radford. General Paul A. Lee here for conferences on the Indochina War, to which the U.S. allocated $1,200 million last year. Chief topic of conversation, Indochina's critical battle at Dien Bien Phu.
General Lee negotiated an intervention by American bombers from the Pacific Fleet to save Dien Bien Phu. But President Eisenhower and the Congress were reluctant. The operation never took place. The French were left on their own. In the lowlands, the wounded lay dying, unable to be evacuated. One soldier, Lucien de Boudec, recalled,
The living and the dead mingle in the mud. The air stinks. Nothing to eat. 20 hours of nightmares. My friend was cut in half by a shell. It took 2 hours for him to die.
At the medical center, doctors sorted out the men they could save. Geneviève de Gala, the courier whose plane was hit, was present at the scene. She helped the dozens of dying men as best she could. She was assisted by the brothel's prostitutes, who acted as nurses. She explained,
"They were remarkable. These women, these prostitutes were transformed into angels of mercy. They enabled me to help the others. They supported our wounded in their misery. They made them eat, drink, hope against hope."
Grande agitation cette semaine à Genève, où M. Bidault a été accueilli par une foule souriante. Le palais de la SDN abritera les débats dont on espère un accord. L'Est rencontre l'Ouest. Cependant, il faut bien le dire, la conférence s'ouvre dans une certaine confusion et Dien Bien Phu pèse sur les débats. Que sortira-t-il de Genève? La paix ou même un espoir de paix?
With the conference about to open, John Foster Dulles, the American Secretary of State, met his counterpart, Georges Bidault. Without really thinking, he suggested the use of 2 atomic bombs. The French foreign minister objected. The bombs would cause too many French casualties and could plunge the world into an abyss. Dien Bien Phu was one of the most heated moments of the Cold War. While talks continued, the final offensive began on May 1st in the mud of the basin. Holed up in his shelter, de Castries was powerless. On May 7th, he telephoned General Cogny. Their last conversation was recorded.
Voilà, alors nous nous descendons pied à pied. Moi je tâcherai de tenir ici le plus longtemps possible, avec ce qui restera, en général. Oui, d'accord, mon vieux. Voilà. Il faut pas de munitions aussi. Il y a des choses à récupérer. C'est plus grave, mon temps. Je dois avoir encore 150 coups. Oui, mon vieux. Voilà. Alors, mon vieux. Il faut encore vous téléphoner avant la fin. Allez, au revoir, mon général. Au revoir, mon général. Au revoir, mon vieux.
After 56 days of siege, on May 7th, 1954, de Castries ordered a ceasefire. Dien Bien Phu had fallen. A French soldier remembered,
Sudden silence. I felt like I was deaf.
Dien Bien Phu was supposed to be a dazzling Verdun. It became another Waterloo. The trap set to capture the Viet Minh was sprung on French troops. France suffered a humiliating defeat. Their citizens grieved for the more than 3,500 dead and missing, and more than 10,000 prisoners. As for the Vietnamese, they lost over 20,000 men, but were victorious. The French leaders made several mistakes. The most fatal, they underestimated their adversary. Contrary to the popular myth, General Navarre was not defeated by an army of barefoot soldiers. This story was cleverly manufactured, but it ignores the fact that the Viet Minh were armed by Beijing and supported by Moscow. In Geneva, the announcement of the loss could not have come at a worse time. Dien Bien Phu was supposed to put France in a position of strength, but instead it put her in a position of weakness. Georges Bidault, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who was negotiating at the Palais des Nations, wrote,
France enters the negotiations with a 2 of clubs and a 3 of diamonds.
The consequences of this disaster were felt in France. The fall of the entrenched camp brought down the 20th government of the Fourth Republic and propelled Pierre Mendès France into the limelight. The MP had been advocating negotiations since 1950. His time had finally come. On June 18, 1954, a highly symbolic date, Pierre Mendès France went to Geneva to negotiate.
Je suis assez heureux pour pouvoir réaliser l'objet que nous poursuivons tous, c'est-à-dire le rétablissement de la paix en Orient.
Monsieur le Président, je pourrais avoir un petit geste de la main, s'il vous plaît. Monsieur Mansford, could you repeat that in English, please, for the American?
It's too difficult for me.
Mendès France put his resignation on the line. If an agreement was not reached within 30 days, he would step down. Reinforcements from mainland France would be called in, and the war would continue. This prospect allowed him to negotiate under better conditions. Zhou Enlai, the Chinese negotiator, and Molotov, the Soviet negotiator, knew that he was their ideal interlocutor. They put enormous pressure on Pham Van Dong, the negotiator delegated by Ho Chi Minh. On July 21, 1954, a few hours before the end of the ultimatum, at 3:20 a.m., an agreement was finally reached.
Au Palais des Nations, au cours d'une très sobre cérémonie, le général Delteil signait au nom de la France les documents mettant fin aux hostilités au Vietnam et au nom du Viet Minh, M. Ta Quang Bu les parapet à son tour. Certes, l'accord contraint la France à des sacrifices douloureux, mais pouvait-il l'être davantage que la perte des 92 000 combattants de l'Union française tombés dans cette guerre sans espoir?
Mendès France showed real political courage. He enabled France to withdraw from the conflict.
La raison et la paix l'ont emporté. Songeons ensemble à ceux qui, hélas, ne reviendront pas, à ceux qui sont restés meurtris dans leur chair ou dans leur cœur. Je n'ai pas besoin d'exprimer les sentiments que j'éprouve, car ce sont les vôtres.
A ceasefire was finally signed. Like the 2 Germanys, the 2 Berlins, and the 2 Koreas, Vietnam was temporarily divided into 2 zones on either side of the 17th parallel. The north fell to the Viet Minh, while the south became a republic under American protection. The sovereignty of Cambodia and Laos was also recognized. Prisoners who had been languishing in camps for several months were gradually exchanged. Of the 10,000 French prisoners, a third perished. A terrible slaughter committed by the Viet Minh in defiance of the rules of war. Years after the start of the war, Ho Chi Minh had won. His supporters celebrated this resounding victory. Van Tam remembered.
Cries of joy went up in the fields and on the hills, red with blood and burnt by napalm. These young infantrymen were victorious. How happy we were.
Ho Chi Minh gave himself a Soviet-style parade, but the victory came at a price. While the population had gained independence, it was also burdened with new chains. Ho Chi Minh established a communist regime, closely aligned with Soviet Russia and the People's Republic of China. A huge exodus led to nearly 1 million Vietnamese fleeing to the south to escape poverty and intolerance. They liquidated their assets and left as quickly as they could. French troops were also evacuating. French legionnaires, mainland and colonial troops all left for other places. The Vietnamese who fought in the French army were abandoned. One officer, Elie de Saint-Marc, wrote,
Most Vietnamese people don't say anything. They just look at us. We're ashamed. If they'd killed us then, we'd have thought it right. One of them said to me, So, Captain, you're giving up on us. I said nothing.
The settlers left the country, leaving the lives they had built there behind. The model colony had come to an end. Some Vietnamese civilians were evacuated to France. Quickly forgotten, they symbolized what France wanted to conceal: its defeat. In the end, the Indochina War resulted in the death or disappearance of 100,000 men on the French side. The Viet Minh lost between 300,000 and 500,000 souls, civilians and soldiers alike. A terrible waste. Like a Greek tragedy, both sides lost. France wanted to maintain its empire, but it collapsed, and its defeat sparked an uprising in Algeria. The Vietnamese had won the war and gained independence, but those living in the north now had to live under the yoke of a harsh regime. The Americans would replace the French in the region. They were to make exactly the same mistakes, cause an even greater slaughter, and suffer an even deeper trauma. The Indochina War was followed by the Vietnam War.
Never miss a moment with SBS On Demand. You can stream your favourite channels live, anytime, on any device. Same shows, same times, always free. Stream now on SBS On Demand.